All right, guys, it's just about 10 after, so let's go ahead and get started. I noticed we have some folks connected in from Massachusetts this morning, from New York, or I guess where you guys are, it's not morning anymore, huh? Over here in Colorado, it is still morning, so good morning or good afternoon, whichever one it is. If you haven't gotten a chance to already, please use the chat function in the top left corner of your screen to chat me where you're coming from and how many students you have in the room today. So we need those attendance numbers. So if you could get them to us, we'd appreciate it. All right, you can also use that chat function as we go through to send me any questions you have as they come up. There's also a Q&A function that you can use for that as well. So whichever one of those you prefer, I'll keep an eye on them and try to answer as many questions as we have as we go along. So my name is Erin, guys, and I'm visiting you from Westminster, Colorado, from the Butterfly Pavilion. Since we have, it seems like, lots of people from all over the country joining us today. Belmont, Massachusetts, we have New York, we've got Florida, Lecanto, Florida, Borger, Texas. So we've got folks all over the country. So let me start by telling you guys a little bit about us. So let me show you where we are. So we're the Butterfly Pavilion. We are located in Westminster, Colorado, just outside Denver, Colorado. And so this is us. This is a little view of outside our facility. Inside, of course, we are called the Butterfly Pavilion. That suggests that we have butterflies, and we sure do. At any one time, we have anywhere between 1,000 and 1,500 butterflies. So we have quite a lot of those. They come from tropical areas all over the world. But we're more than just butterflies. We also have spiders and scorpions and ants and beetles and bees. We have coral. We have horseshoe crabs, sea stars, hermit crabs. We have an octopus. We have all kinds of different animals, and the thing that all those animals have in common is that they are invertebrates. We are an invertebrate zoo. That means that we are a zoo for animals without bones. So all those animals, the reason we have them here is because they don't have bones. There's quite a lot of reasons to have an entire zoo dedicated to animals without bones, and one of them is this. 97% of all the animals in the world are invertebrates. 97% of all the animals in the world have no bones. That means just 3% are vertebrates. 3% are animals like cats and dogs and birds and fish and us. Okay, 3% of animals in the world have bones. So this is one reason to have an entire zoo dedicated to invertebrates. There's just a ton of them. They outnumber us by a huge amount, but that's not the only reason. Invertebrates are also incredibly important. So they are important parts of ecosystems and food webs. They can eat other pest animals that we don't want to have around. They're food for other animals, and they help to pollinate a significant portion of the food that we eat. And today, as is maybe most relevant for National Nutrition Month, they are food for us. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, guys, bugs as food. So before we dive in, I would love to know from you guys, would you eat a bug? So you should see a poll up on your screen. If you're in a room with several kiddos, poll those guys and send me the majority response. If it's just you, let me know what you think. Would you eat a bug? All right, I'll give just a couple seconds. All right, awesome. I think I have everybody's responses, so let's take a look. More than half of you guys said yes. So I guess my job here is done. I can just go home because I was going to try to convince you that it's totally okay to eat a bug, and most of you guys think it already is. Most of you would already eat a bug. That's awesome. A few of you are not convinced yet, so that's all right. That's what I'm going to try to work on. I want to show you guys that you have totally eaten a bug, whether you realize it or not, and that eating bugs is totally normal and totally safe. So first of all, I said you've eaten a bug whether you know it or not. So let's think about that. If you ate breakfast today, some of you might have already eaten lunch today, you've probably eaten part of a bug already today. I know that sounds really gross, but before we go farther in that, I would like to know, well, I already gave this one away, but let's do it anyway. How many of you guys have ever eaten a bug? So let's say knowingly. How many of you have knowingly eaten a bug? Some of you guys said you would. but how many of you already have? I think this is exactly the same result we got before. So a little bit more than half of you guys said yes, you've eaten a bug before. Some of you guys said no. No one said I don't know. Okay, I already kind of gave it away that you have eaten a bug, even if you didn't realize it. So those of you guys who said no, we're going to see something in a second that's going to maybe change that answer. So here in the United States, we don't usually eat bugs on purpose. Okay, people eat bugs all over the world, but the difference here is that we usually don't know we're doing it. We usually don't do it intentionally. But we do eat them all the time because there are bugs that end up in our food without meaning to get there. So the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is a part of our federal government that makes rules about the safety and quality of our food. They monitor it and they make sure it's okay for us to eat. And they have limits for how many bug parts can be in our food. So I have some examples of foods here that we're going to take a look at and see what those limits are like. Let me go ahead and switch over here so I can show you. All right, so let's start with ground cinnamon. All right, the FDA says in ground cinnamon right here, there can be 400 or more insect fragments in 50 grams. And that's what 50 grams looks like. This is a lot of cinnamon, in fairness, but 400 plus insect parts is also a fair amount of insect parts. All right, so that's cinnamon. Let's see some other examples. In ground pepper. All right, so ground black pepper, just your typical ground pepper. There could be 475 or more insect fragments in 50 grams. This is 50 grams of ground pepper. So again, that's a lot of ground pepper, but 475 or more insect fragments is also a lot of insect fragments. But as I hold this a little bit closer, take a look. We really can't see any bug parts. We can't tell if they're there or not. And that's the case with all these foods. We're not going to be able to tell that there are any bug parts in there, but there could be. The FDA says it's okay if there are. Raisins. All right, we might have some fans of raisins out there. In 8 ounces of raisins, which looks like this, two cups or so, 2 pretty full bowls of raisins, we could have 10 or more whole insects or 35 fruit fly eggs. This kind of makes sense. Raisins are dried fruit, and fruit flies like fruit. That makes sense. All right, peanut butter. Getting real now. Peanut butter. In 100 grams of peanut butter, there could be 30 or more insect fragments. This is probably more peanut butter than you'd eat at one time, but 30 or more insect fragments could be in there, and that would be totally safe and okay by the FDA. All right, I have a few more examples for you guys. I see a response saying, no, I eat peanut butter all the time. Well, that's okay, guys. It's okay. We'll talk about that. Pizza sauce. I bet a lot of you guys eat pizza all the time. I know I do. In 100 grams of pizza sauce, there could be 30 or more fly eggs or 15 fly eggs and 1 maggot. All right, last 2. Hope you guys already ate lunch today. Chocolate. All right, 100 grams of chocolate could have 60 or more insect fragments. And that's 100 grams of chocolate right there. That is most of a chocolate bar like that. See someone saying, we're headed to lunch next. Well, it's about to get really appetizing. Last one, citrus juice. In 250 milliliters of citrus juice, we could have 5 fruit fly eggs or 1 maggot per 150 milliliters, 250 milliliters, excuse me. Oh, somebody just ate pizza for lunch. Well, you got some extra protein from bugs. So that 250 milliliters of juice, just to give you a reference, is about half of a bottle like this. So not a large amount. All right, some of you guys might be saying to yourselves that I'm never gonna eat those bugs again. That's so gross, I'm never gonna eat. never gonna eat those foods again, those foods that have those bugs in them. And that's fine. You can avoid pizza for the rest of your life, but you still won't avoid eating bugs. Let me share with you a little glance at this handbook that the FDA uses to set those limits. So this is actually available online. You can even look it up and find out how many bugs and other things are in all the different foods you like to eat. And if I start scrolling through it, we're going to see that they have these limits for all kinds of foods. Not just those examples I showed you. It would take quite a long time just to scroll through this entire thing without even reading it all. So they have these limits for all kinds of different foods. And if we looked closely, if we paused at some of these, we would notice that the limit is not 0. So the FDA is tasked with making sure our food is safe and of good enough quality, and they set these limits to make sure that's true, but they don't set those limits to 0. They don't say no bug parts ever. Why not? What do you guys think? I have a question for you to consider. Why does the FDA allow bug parts in our food? Let me know what you think. So our choices here are they don't hurt us, they add extra flavor, or it would be impossible to keep them all out. So what is the most likely reason that you think? Give you guys a few more seconds. I think a couple groups are maybe still polling their audiences. Okay, let's take a look at what you guys had to say. So, some of you guys said they don't hurt us, and some of you said it would be impossible to keep them all out, and you are all right. Those are both reasons the FDA allows some amount of bug parts in our food. They add extra flavor is not really one of the answers we're looking for, because if that were the case, then those food producers would need to list those bugs as an ingredient. They would be in there on purpose, and they would be listed on the label as an ingredient. So we're talking about bug parts that end up in our food without meaning to. And those are allowed there because they don't hurt us, and it would be impossible to keep them all out. So our food is, oops, let me get rid of this out of your screen. So our food is produced and packaged at such a huge scale that it would be impossible to know if a bug even got in. They're produced and packaged in facilities that are kept really clean, but even so, it would be really tough to know and keep out all bugs and know if one had gotten in. So that's okay though. The FDA says, yeah, that's okay, just not too much of it. They set those limits. Those limits that I shared with you, the examples that we saw, are not set at a point where more bugs in our food would become harmful. They're not set because above that, we could no longer eat that food because it would hurt us. They're set at those levels because above that, they have aesthetic deterioration. That means that they might start to be noticeable. We might see that it's contaminated in some way, or we might taste it, that it doesn't taste as good. So it would just not be as appetizing. Still wouldn't be harmful, just not as appetizing. So that's where those limits are set. Awesome. So like I said though, the FDA is not too worried about it because of that. And in fact, guys, people all over the world eat bugs all the time on purpose. So we're talking now about people who don't just accidentally eat them in their peanut butter, but who actually eat bugs intentionally as a big part of their diet. And there's a lot of good reasons to do that. And I want to know first, before we go through them, what you guys think is the most likely reason people eat bugs all the time. So we have a lot of choices this time. We can decide that people might eat bugs because they're tasty, because they're good for us, because they're traditional, they're inexpensive, they're simply cheap to buy, because they're abundant or because they're good for the environment. So just choose the answer that you think is most likely, the most likely reason someone might eat a bug, and let me know what you think. Give you guys a few more seconds. We have a couple groups that are maybe still polling. All right, let's take a look at what you guys had to say. So we're fairly evenly split, which I actually really like seeing. So no one responded that they're inexpensive, which is interesting. And we'll look at each of these in turn. But I love how evenly split we are, because guess what, guys? There was no wrong answer here. All of these are reasons people might eat bugs. So you're totally right. Some of you guys might have had a hard time choosing. I see in a couple of chats that people tried to let me know they were thinking of more than one answer. And that's great, because all of those are reasons people might eat bugs. So let's take a look at some of them. So let's start with abundant. Remember when we said earlier 97% of the animals in the world are invertebrates? Well, that means 97% of the animals in the world are what we might refer to at the Butterfly Pavilion as bugs. So yeah, there's a lot of them. There's way more of them than there are of us. So that's one reason people might eat them. Because they're abundant, because there's so many of them, because people can sometimes gather them themselves or hunt for them themselves, because it's not too difficult to raise them for those that do farm them, they can also be very inexpensive. So they don't cost a lot to buy. And that's another great reason people might eat them. And let's take a look at good for us. They're totally good for us. So they're a great source of nutrition. They're an excellent source of protein, of vitamins and minerals that we see. So here we see in crickets, we've got a good amount of protein going on. We've got 63% of the iron that we need. So we're getting a lot of protein and other nutrition from bugs. In very large spiders, take a look at this. Out of 100 grams of that spider that you might eat, like a tarantula, 63 grams of that is protein. That's a huge amount of protein. And we can compare the nutritional value of bugs to the nutritional value of the same amount of beef. So in 100 grams of beef, like a hamburger, versus 100 grams of crickets or other bugs, we could have a difference of maybe a little bit more than half the protein in the bugs. So not as much protein by the same amount of volume. However, let's look at these other factors. 288 calories in beef versus 121 in crickets. So less than half the calories and about a quarter the amount of fat. So we're still getting a good source of protein, not as good maybe, but still a really good source of protein from a much more nutritious source, much healthier source for us. Awesome. Oh, I actually have one more to show you guys. So let's take a look at good for the environment. They're not just good for us, they're good for the environment. Let's examine the amount of beef versus the amount of crickets you could get from the same amount of land. So on 1 hectare of land, you could raise 100 kilograms of beef, or you could take that same amount of land and raise 1 ton of crickets. And a ton is about 907 kilograms. So we're talking about raising 9 times as much crickets on the same amount of land. So raising invertebrates takes less land. It often takes less water. Invertebrates can also sometimes be fed on waste products like compost. So it's just overall a much better choice for the environment as well. Some of you guys said that people might eat bugs because it's traditional, and that's totally true also. They are traditionally eaten in cultures all around the world, and they have been for as long as people have existed. And it's actually a much more recent development that we have decided that bugs are not tasty, that bugs are gross, and we don't want to eat them. That's actually pretty recent. Okay, and so I alluded to the fact that bugs are tasty. And I think a couple of you guys said that they might be tasty, and some of you guys mentioned that in your chat as well. So yeah, totally, people eat bugs because they taste good. And we're going to see some examples of bugs eaten around the world and see what they might taste like. All right, awesome. Let's take a look at those. We're going to start with one of our closest neighbors, Mexico. 40% of all the insects that are eaten in the world are eaten in Mexico. So that could be insects like some of these that I'm going to show you, like crickets. Crickets and grasshoppers. Put that behind us so that maybe you can see it a little bit better. Crickets and grasshoppers and things like that. Insects like that are very commonly eaten in Mexico. They are usually served fried and salted, and they're said to taste like nuts or popcorn. Sounds pretty good. All right. Another insect that might be eaten in Mexico or other parts of Central or even maybe North America, and that is mealworms or superworms. These are the larvae of a beetle, and they are eaten in various ways. They can be cooked lots of different ways. They have a pretty mild flavor. They tend to take on the flavor of whatever they're being cooked with or whatever seasoning you might be using. And if you roast them, they're going to taste a little bit nutty. So let's take a look. We're going to try to fill in a map as we go to show where we're finding edible bugs. So, all right, so far we're filling in Central America. So that was Mexico and other parts of Central America that might eat bugs like that. All right, let's take a look though. We're going to move on to South America. So we're just going to move down a little bit. South America, we have here a tarantula. So we just saw a couple of insects that people might eat. Here we've got an arachnid that people can totally eat. This is a curly hair tarantula. Those hairs all over a tarantula's body are going to be kind of irritating to us, so we don't want to eat those. But people can cook these guys, remove the hairs, and then eat them. And they are eaten usually deep fried, and they are said to taste like chicken or fish. So let's check out our map again real quick, because we are now filling in South America. So South America, where we might eat tarantulas. And we're going to jump to, because tarantulas are also eaten in parts of Asia, as are these guys. This is scorpion. Scorpion is another arachnid, just like a tarantula is, that people can eat. And tarantulas and scorpions are both venomous animals, so their bodies produce a toxic chemical that they can use to bite or sting. And we wouldn't want to eat that venom, but because that venom is isolated to a specific part of their body, we can remove it, and then we can eat the rest of the animal. Nice. So now we've got Asia filled in for that. And we're going to move down next to Australia. And I don't have a specific Australian grub to show you. So this guy's going to stand in for some of his cousins in Australia. This is a grub. And people in Australia, the main one that they would eat is actually the witchetty grub, which is considerably larger than this guy here. So this grub is maybe about the length of my finger. Not huge. A witchetty grub that would be found in Australia is more like forearm sized. So this is just a little one compared to that. He's going to stand in for his cousins in Australia. Grubs can be eaten raw. You don't even have to cook them at all if you don't want to. Or they can be eaten roasted Roasted, in which case they would taste kind of nutty. All right, so that was Australia. We're gonna look now at a bug eaten in Africa. This one's gonna represent any bug that might get eaten in Africa. And this is a Madagascar hissing cockroach. And these guys come from Madagascar, as their name suggests, which is that island off the coast of Africa. And these guys are totally edible. Sometimes they hiss. This one's not hissing for us today. This one, they usually will hiss if they feel threatened, if they feel like you're going to try to eat them. This guy must know he's got another show to do after this, so he's not going to hiss at me. He knows I'm not going to try to eat him. But I totally could if I wanted to. Awesome. So let's take a look at how much of our map we filled in now. We filled in a pretty good amount of the world. What's missing still is Europe and North America. So let's examine that though, because I do have an animal that might be eaten in Europe. Some of you guys may have heard of escargot before. That is the French for snail. Snails are a delicacy in Europe, in France specifically. So I have some snails here. So these guys are still, you might still call them bugs. They're at least still invertebrates, that's for sure. And they are totally edible. We could absolutely eat them. So that fills in Europe for us. Parts of Europe, especially Spain, also eat octopus and things like that. So there are plenty of other invertebrates eaten in Europe. So we haven't filled in the United States yet. So it's a good time, oops, let me switch this over to me. It's a good time to think about what we mean by bug. Because I've been using bug kind of casually. We haven't really defined it yet. But I have mentioned a couple of times that what we're really talking about is invertebrates. So a bug, here at the Butterfly Pavilion, we use that term to really mean any invertebrate, so any animal without bones. And by that definition, we absolutely eat bugs in the United States all the time, intentionally. Many of you guys may have eaten shrimp or crabs or lobster before. Any of those animals are invertebrates, or as we might call them here at the Butterfly Pavilion, bugs. So with that in mind then, let's take a look at what part of the map we fill in. So we've actually got the entire world filled in at this point. So bug eating is not actually as strange or as gross or as distant from you as you may have thought. It's actually totally normal. See, I have a couple questions here, so I'm going to pause for a second. And I'll remind you guys that if you have questions, you can use that Q&A feature, as a couple people have. And you can also send me a chat if you'd like to. So I'm getting the question, how do we find out how healthy bugs are? That's kind of tricky here in the US because we don't really eat bugs very much. We don't have that information maybe as readily as available as we do for other foods. So it's, you know, when we buy prepared foods, we have to see the nutrition information listed, and companies that produce them are required to provide that. But because we don't really have many bugs produced for sale here in the United States, it's harder to find that. It is harder to find it. So, you know, for most things, of course, the internet's a great resource, but it can also be a tricky one. There are some bugs that I'll show you guys that you can buy in the United States. You can buy them online. You might be able to buy them in certain stores. And these, because they're packaged for sale, have nutrition information on the back. So when you do find them available for sale, you should be able to find that as well. Hopefully that answers your question. Awesome. All right, so again, feel free to send me any questions you have. But I guess now that we've seen some examples of bugs eaten around the world, we've seen how people eat them unintentionally and intentionally, I'm curious to know how many of you guys are willing to eat a bug now. Many of you guys were at the beginning anyway. Let's see if that's changed now. Give you guys a few more seconds. We're still waiting on a few responses. All right, let's take a look at your responses. So many of you said yes, so I think we had a lot of yeses at the beginning already, so I'm glad we didn't change your mind toward no, at least. No one said no, so I'm very happy about that. And a couple of you are a little on the fence about it still. You're thinking about it, but maybe open to it, and that is awesome. So hopefully that means you will be at least open-minded to some of the ways that bugs are becoming a little more popular here in the United States. And I showed you a couple examples. Things that you can buy sort of as a novelty are things like cheddar cheese flavored mealworms. Or if cheddar cheese is not your flavor, you can buy barbecue flavored mealworms. Or crickets, same thing, available in these flavors as well. Chocolate covered, if that helps it go down a little easier. Those are available as well. Another thing that's really taking off here in the United States is cricket flour. So cricket flour can be substituted for other kinds of flour to make baked goods or to make products like these cricket granola bars. So these you wouldn't even be able to tell that there's crickets in there, but they're made using crickets, which is a great option, as we've said, for our own nutrition and for the environment as well. And let's see, I do have a question that came in. So I do have a question about, are there bugs that are unhealthy or cannot be eaten? And yes, absolutely. So don't just go out into your backyard and start eating any bugs you find. It's still important to know what you're eating. There are definitely bugs that are poisonous to us. So I mentioned that the tarantula and scorpion that I showed you are venomous, right? Those could bite or sting us and be harmful. And so we can still eat them because we can remove the venomous part. But bugs that are poisonous are going to be harmful to us if we eat them. So that would be things like millipedes are poisonous. We wouldn't want to eat those. There's plenty of animals that are poisonous and we couldn't eat. So yeah, absolutely. As for unhealthy, I don't know, besides just unsafe in that way. Besides being poisonous, I don't know that there are any that are unhealthy in a different way. Good question. And I'll stick around for a few more questions as you guys think of them, but I also just want to let you know that we have a variety of other distance learning programs, including Monarch Mysteries, Besieged Bees, sort of focusing on pollinators, and a virtual invertebrate encounter where you get to ask us tons and tons of questions about either an arachnid or an insect. And you can book those through Field Trip Zoom, or you can book them directly through our website. And any that you book and are delivered by the end of this year will be 30% off. So like I said, I'll stick around for any questions you guys have. Either way, I want to thank Field Trip Zoom for hosting this event, and thanks to all of you for joining. All right, guys, so I did get a question come in. Can you buy bugs at the grocery store in other countries? And I suspect that, yes, you absolutely can. In fact, at some grocery stores here in the United States, you can buy them. So I imagine in other cultures where they are actually eaten, they're even more easily found in grocery stores. So here in the United States, for instance, we've had good luck finding them at specialty grocery stores, like Asian markets and things like that, that are catering to cultures that do eat bugs, and you can sometimes find them there. Or if you have a health food store or a specialty grocery store, they might start stocking cricket flour products and things like that. And if they haven't, you can always suggest that to them. Plus, remember that we defined bugs as any invertebrate. So, in fact, you can buy plenty of different bugs at any grocery store here, can't you? You can buy shrimp and crabs and things like that at most grocery stores, not just in other countries, but here in the United States as well. I have a question about the dreaded banana spider. Is it common to find a banana spider in the United States in our bananas? I don't think that I would call it common. It can happen that the wandering spider gets into your bananas and travels over, but that's not one that we would end up eating. That's one that would get out before we were to eat that banana, I guess I would say. I don't know how common it is. I don't think it's very common. Every once in a while you hear a story about it, but it doesn't come up very often. Good questions, guys. Keep sending them in if you think of them. Or if you're ready to disconnect, feel free. Thanks again for joining. I'll stick around for another few minutes if you have some more questions. All right, we have another question coming in about how do fruit flies get into your house even if the windows and doors are closed? Why do they reproduce so quickly? That is a great question. Well, fruit flies, I mean, windows and doors are closed. I don't know that that would create a seal necessarily for fruit flies anyway, because they're so tiny. But I think they also get in just with your fruit. So fruit that you bring home might have fruit flies or fruit fly eggs there that you didn't realize. And then those might hatch in your house and you have fruit flies all of a sudden. Why they reproduce so quickly? Well, I don't know. I suppose that's just how they grow their numbers so well, and what they do to survive. So some animals live a long time, some animals live a short time, but they reproduce super fast. And I think that might be the case for fruit flies. Good question. It does seem like once you have one, you have a ton of them. That's for sure. All right, we have one last question that I'm unfortunately not going to have probably a very satisfying answer to. How do bugs mate? And the answer really is that it very much depends on the bug. They have all different methods, and bugs, as we said, refers to a whole ton of different animals, and each of them might have a different method. So it's a great question, but it's a big question, and one for further research. So thanks again, guys, for joining me. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect now, but I appreciate you coming along and considering eating bugs. Have a great day, guys.